our discussions on the new education policy that we've been having for some time. And I want to thank Professor K.K. Aggarwal for having taken the trouble to organize these very interesting and important discussions. As you know, at the VIF, we have been focusing on education for a number of years. And we feel that education is important from the point of view of national progress, prosperity, and nation building. And also, we think that the context of national security, we have to build India in all its dimensions. And we have come to realize that the education, health, and social sectors are equally important if we have to build a strong and secure India. We have in the last few years, as I said, focused on the education sector in India. And Professor Aggarwal had spearheaded a study on the STEM education in India. And this was before the new education policy was announced. And we had come out with a report, which is on our website. And we have discussed that report also in our previous sessions. But now that the new education policy is here, we thought that we could organize this meeting to take stock of the importance that the new education policy gives to science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and innovation, which is really the base on which we have to build a strong and prosperous India. Today, of course, we are living in a very different world. Particularly, Corona has changed the world completely. There is, apart from the fact that there is a competition amongst various countries to reach the top through various means. But I think building their scientific and technological capabilities, their innovation, and also building their share in the global trade, that I think becomes extremely important. And today, trade is dominated by high technology, the new technologies, and high technology products. But even in the social sectors, we find that science and technology is playing an extremely important role. We are seeing how in the area of health, pandemic has shown us that we have to build our health systems, and particularly health security. And the race for vaccines is also hotting up. And I think the vaccine politics, which is now developing, vaccine nationalism, which is developing, is as important as, let us say, the military capabilities of a country. So we have to take a holistic look at our at national security, and we have seen that all the major countries, they are spending a lot of money on R&D, on innovation, and they are also spending a lot of money on STEM education. So where do we stand in the STEM education? Where, how does the new education policy promote STEM education in the country? What is our future in the next 10 to 15 years in the STEM area? I think these are some of the issues which we need to discuss. So we have eminent speakers today with us. Professor K.K. Aggarwal would start the discussions, and he would probably also speak about our report that he was the author of, in fact, on STEM education. And then we are most grateful to Anil Sahasrabudhe, who is the chairman of the AICTE. AICTE plays an extremely important role in engineering and technological education. Then, of course, we have Professor Ashutosh Sharma, the secretary in the Department of Science and Technology, who has been spearheading the department since 2015. And I had a chance of interacting with him briefly on a few occasions when I was in the National Security Council Secretariat. And I think the new policy, the science and technology policy that the government, I think, has already is discussing, and it is for discussion. Perhaps that also has a bearing on STEM education. Uh, so unless we make our universities and strong in science and education, we won't be able to make much headway. Of course, we have a number of very important institutions which are doing great work, but in the end, it must reach our universities, like in the US, where the best research is done in the universities. That is not the case still in India. So, how do we build our universities and education institutions in science and technology? And even before that, how do we make science and technology popular in the schools so that there is a strong and a wide base from where we can draw our talent. So these are some of the issues I think we would discuss. But let me now request Professor Aggarwal to kindly make his remarks and take the session further.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for organizing this very important session. My dear friend, Professor Anil Sahasrabudhe ji, Chairman, All India Council for Technical Education, Dr. Ashutosh Sharma ji, Secretary Science and Technology for so long, and Dr. Gupta and other eminent intellectual friends joined here. It's a pleasure to be a part of this session. As Dr. Gupta said, that VIF really decided to go formally in education, keeping in view the indirect bearing and the direct bearing it has on the national security. Because unless we have the security of a country, I read somewhere is a very important statement. He says security today will depend upon economic security, and economic security will depend upon technological security. So if we do not have science and technology security, even the security per se could be a difficult thing to achieve, and therefore the efforts on education, and particularly science technology education, were realized as key bearing on the national security also. And that is how the think tank on security, our most important think tank on national security, Vivekananda International Foundation, went into this. And as Dr. Gupta said, in March 2019, we brought out a publication, probably one of the first formal publications in the domain of STEM education in this country, which was titled as Importance of STEM Education in National Policy. Thereafter, we had a second session on the follow-up of the policy, again 5-6 months before the national policy on education came forward on the scene, and where about 30-35 vice chancellors discussed as to how can we carry it forward. So with this background, we were moving in the forum of Vivekananda International Foundation, and then the national education policy came on the scene. Friends, you are all very eminently connected to the scene of academics and science and technology. And therefore, I mean, policies come as a document one fine morning, but that does not mean everything happens one fine morning. It's an evolution over several years, which results into a policy. For example, if I talk about the two organizations which are represented here by Professor Sahasrabudhe and Professor Ashutosh Sharma, AICT has been taking several steps on science and technology education, which I will not elaborate. Professor Sahasrabudhe himself is here. And similarly, Professor Ashutosh Sharma on science popularization, on science R&D, so much has been steered, and much of it has been culminated in the documented form of national education policy. One of the efforts of science and technology which I appreciated, which Dr. Gupta has also hinted on, popularization of science. I mean, Dr. Ashutosh Gupta's Ashutosh Sharma's this step, that anybody who submits a thesis, PhD thesis in the area of science and technology will have to give a popular lecture before submission of the thesis, is a great step in taking science and technology forward, because unless we bring science and technology in the central nervous system of everybody, this doesn't happen. And a beautiful article which I read, they said we dance in this country develops in the form of gharanas. Music in this country develops in the form of gharanas. But in science, we forget about gharanas. We do not take it from guru to shishya, shishya to shishya, so that the parampara keeps on and science develops. This is something serious. We will have to look into it. And probably we are maybe the only or maybe one of the few countries where the constitution mandate as a fundamental duty of Indian citizen is to develop scientific temperament. I mean, I'm not aware of many countries where constitution mandates you to develop scientific temperament, and still, unfortunately, we are where we are. And many a times we see our youth far away from scientific temperament. So therefore, to bring in science education, technology education, and scientific temperament in the solution of problems is something which we are all trying to work for in this direction. And I'm so happy to have Professor Sahasrabudhe and Professor Ashutosh Sharma here. I was always sure they will be available to us in this webinar, but I was never sure about their availability of time slot. Because of the various engagements which have increased manifold in the online mode these days. So thank you very much, Professor Sahasrabudhe and Professor Sharma, to be here with us. And after having written that report on science STEM education, which has now been mentioned in the national education policy at several points, directly and indirectly, the word has moved further. I read now they talk about STEAM education. So it's not science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It is A has been inserted, and some people say A stands for arts. Some say A stands for agriculture, and I find both are correct. So whether it's science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, or science, technology, engineering, agriculture, and mathematics, both are correct. In a foreign paper I read, they say you can't even exclude medical education now. So they say STEM with double M. So mathematics and medical. So the point is, this STEM has now evolved as a philosophy of multidisciplinarity, which is the necessary culture. And this is how it gels so much, so well with the national education policy, where multidisciplinarity is one of the central themes of national education policy. So I see, friends, STEM as a philosophy, not STEM as a subject. And in that direction, we carry ourselves. Dr. Gupta wanted to organize quite a few webinars on national education policy. We had one on national education policy and nation building. Then we had one on national education policy and holistic education. And this one is national education policy on STEM education, which is a continuation of VIF efforts on STEM education. During this period, August onwards, after the policy has been announced, I think all of us have been having multiple webinars per day on national education policy. And over these webinars, some questions have come up, which I thought I'll address one or two. Some people ask me, how come you in the policy want young children to learn computers, very young children to learn computers? Friends, I have been explaining, computer again, let us not take computer as algorithm design. Let us not take computers as data structures. Let us not take computers as data, as discrete mathematics. Computer is computational thinking, which is way of life, logical thinking. So we want our youth to be very logical in thinking, to break up the complex problem into simple problems. I remember having read a book long time back which says you can eat an elephant. The title of the book is You Can Eat an Elephant, and the second page says, provided you know how to slice it properly. So that is what computational thinking says. Can we decompose a complex problem into a series of small problems and we can solve it? And CPSS now is a very established subject. Complex problems, simple solutions. So that is where we want computational thinking to come in, not so much in the heart of computers. Second thing, question which has come up many times is as if multidisciplinarity will lead to no discipline. Somebody said if a student says, okay, I'll study physics, I'll study philosophy, I'll study music, I'll study cricket, which degree will you give it? I mean, I don't think that is the concept while we'll implement. We will have to have a directed multidisciplinarity. Only thing it means is let's not confine only to one discipline. Let the student be aware of several disciplines, because that is how we solve life's problems. And something which I've always quoted quite a few times is the paper which I like the best. They say that the student of today, irrespective of the discipline, will have to be a T-shaped personality. You will have to depth of some subject and breadth of several subjects. Then only he will be able to solve the problems. And multidisciplinarity is going to give us the forum for designing several specialized programs. For example, if you want to give MS in drug design, now this cannot develop from physics department or chemistry department or computer science department. I think as long as we have tight departmental oriented organizational structures in the universities, these interdisciplinary courses are not are taking that shape which we have to. Cyber security, for example, is not a pure computer science course. Artificial intelligence is not a pure computer science course, and therefore multidisciplinarity will lead us to many beautiful concepts which this policy has enabled and will help us to take forward in the long run. Friends, I read now smart cities were being talked about. Now people are already, I saw a presentation, smart university campus. That's the kind of transformation which we're going to have. And the subjects like econometrics, mechatronics, autonomous cars. Now, if you want to have a formal training on autonomous cars, it cannot be mechanical engineering, it cannot be automobiles. And I remember the interview of Mercedes, and asked him, sir, what are you trying to see your competitor? He says, not any car company. My competitors are computer companies, Google, Amazon, Facebook, because tomorrow my car will be a sophisticated computer riding on the four tires. So that will be the definition of an automobile. So will it be a mechanical engineering subject? Will it be an automobile subject? Certainly not. And people now even talk beyond the technology. I read the paper about the discipline of cobotics. They say collaborative robotics, because robots and human beings will have to work together to deliver the goods. And these are the kinds of multidisciplinary dimensions which we mean when we talk about multidisciplinarity. I think the notion should be clear. Multidisciplinarity does not mean no disciplinarity. It could mean only your increasing your utility. And another very beautiful transformation in national education policy, which ultimately helps in STEM education, is also that when we redesign our four-year BSc program, redesign it completely, keeping in view the lines. Today, our BSc program is PCM or PCB. Entire Mohalla is worried whether your son or daughter is going for PCM or PCB, as if it's either going to North Pole or South Pole, and heavens are going to fall if this doesn't happen. But we need today people who are equally good in mathematics and equally good in life sciences. So maybe 4-year course gives us one of the possibilities that one can be equally fair to PCMB, taking all the 4 subjects together. 4-year program may also give us 1 major, 3 minors. It may give us a possibility of 2 majors, 2 minors, so that varied interests could be taken care of. Vocational subjects and general subjects, vocational subjects and technical subjects could be combined. For example, in one of the webinars, I've said in that STEM report also, I've said, today, if a student of BSc studying physics also takes TV repair as a vocational subject, which in 4 years may be possible, or takes a computer repair as a vocational subject, which may be possible, he may be a much better technician, which we need today, and still he doesn't lose any potential avenues which he wanted to have as a graduate, because parents in this country still want you to have a degree for whatever reasons. And therefore, the solutions where we could combine these things may be possible. This 4-year, new redesigned 4-year program may also give us enough opportunities for pictorial thinking, which we have almost missing, observing the nature, which we had almost lost sight of, to look at the nature. I was reading an experiment done in a foreign university. It was called White Sox experiment. A beautiful, very simple experiment. When the students came to the campus of the university, a very green campus, very laden with trees and all that, and the seeds fallen on the pathways, they asked the students to come in white socks, remove the shoes, and walk through the campus with white socks on. And after walking a mile or so, they said, okay, now here are the cheap, low-cost microscopes, which they designed at about less than $10 per microscope. And they say, now you observe your socks, and can you identify the seeds which have stuck to the socks and identify the trees based on that? Now that's connecting with the nature. And in contrast, I was remembering a PhD viva of a botany student, where after 350 pages thesis, so many papers, Scopus papers, high impact papers, bar charts, pie charts, everything. When the viva was held, the examiner was very happy. He said, okay, well done, my dear student, you get a degree. Says the whole thesis was on the leaf of a tree. You know, how many branches, sizes, high pie chart, distribution. He said, everything fine, my dear. Just a last observation, which tree this leaf belongs to? And the student did not know. He had done 3 years of research on the leaf of a tree, but which tree this leaf belongs to was not known. That is how we were disconnecting with the nature. We were disconnecting with the roots of the knowledge tree, and those gaps have been created. I'm hopeful and confident and a hardcore optimist that implementation of this national policy will take us closer to the realities of life while implementing this policy. With these few words, I think I'll stop here and give floor to the two of the most eminent speakers we have today. Over to Dr. Gupta for inviting the speakers, please. Dr. Gupta?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Aggarwal, for your introductory remarks. And now, may I request Professor Anil Sahasrabudhe to kindly make his remarks.
Yeah, namaskar. Good afternoon, everyone. Namaskar ji. Dr. Arvind Gupta, Director of BIF, Professor K.K. Aggarwal, Chairman NBA, Distinguished Fellow of Vivekananda International Foundation, and who has given a brief outline about how STEM education has been taken forward in the National Education Policy 2020, recent policy which was announced. And my friend, Professor Ashutosh Sharma, who has been Secretary DST and spearheading the entire science movement in terms of research through different science institutions in the country. It's very interesting that such a phenomenal, webinar is being organized at a time when it is of utmost importance for the nation. Science and the entire STEM education itself, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as we call it as STEM. Professor Aggarwal rightly pointed out that people are now talking about from STEM to STEAM, and also STEAM, double M also he talked about. But this a variety of people talk about it as necessarily arts, but some of them also talk about agriculture because that's so important for the human race. Agriculture is one of the most important subjects. But more importantly, I would like to say that it is also attitude. Whether the STEM attitude is there in the people, that attitude creation is also very significant and important. On one side, in the STEM education, which is normally governed by the left brain, logical thinking, methodical or systematic study, analytical thinking, reasoning, written skills, number skills, these are all things which are there as part of the STEM education, which is taken care of by the left brain. Whereas the arts or the humanities and social sciences, which is taken care of by the right brain, which is also included in this policy along with STEM as STEAM, which takes care of creativity, innovation, imagination, intuition, insight, entire holistic part of it, even 3D form and 4D form if required. And this is all being done in the right hand brain, and that's why both left hand and right hand brain are equally important. So while we are discussing about STEM education, certainly that is steam is important, and this steam gives energy. In mechanical engineering, the first engine came from steam engine. So I think our driving force for the STEM education comes from the applied arts, crafts, design, drama, music, dance. All of this which creates innovation, creativity is equally important. Of course, science education is all about observation, methodical study of subject, leading to verifiable, repetitive experiment, which is so significant. But while we are talking about this science, certainly we should also step back and see what happened in ancient India. We may not have a variety of very sophisticated microscopes, traveling electron microscope, or many other types of equipment which we have today. But nevertheless, they also had the power of observation, which they had used immensely. And therefore, the policy also talks about values, ethics, along with that, ancient traditional knowledge systems. And the division of Indian knowledge systems or Bharatiya Jnana Parampara is already established in the ministry, which is also going to talk about both science as well as the other part, the 64 kalas, which are very, very important. So I think the marriage of the STEM, that is science and technology, mathematics on one side, to the other side, all of these humanities and social sciences is very, very important. And that is where this principle, which is enunciated in this policy, which talks about what we say as the multidisciplinary universities, multidisciplinary education, takes roots. And this is where, when we talk about holistic education, multidisciplinary education, many facets will emerge. You rightly pointed out that in many cases, biology is also equally important. I suddenly remembered when we were talking about that, my previous job in College of Engineering, Pune, when we introduced biology as mandatory subject way back in 2006. Now, many IITs have a mandatory biology course in engineering, but it was in 2006, thanks to Dr. Kohli, who insisted that we should have biology as mandatory course. Most of the students opposed. They said we stopped learning biology after class 10. We took PCM and computer science, or PCM and statistics, and now you are forcing us to again learn biology. But we then innovated and said that instead of calling it as a subject of biology, we called it as human machines. The name of the course was redesignated as human machines, and then they started learning because they thought something related with machines is there, so it is engineering. But they realized later that the entire human body is nothing but a greatest invention of a machine, actually. All variety, you have pump, you have the different types of filtrations, everything that exists in different types of technology and science domain exists in a single one species, that is human body itself. So after learning that, within 1 or 2 years, we found that they won the Microsoft Challenge Award, which is called as Imagine Cup Award. And this was just a matter of 1 or 2 years of study of biology, which we insisted on doing it. So I think that is where multidisciplinary does not mean as rightly pointed out by Professor Aggarwal earlier, that I study cricket, I study music, I study drama, I study engineering, I study one science subject, I will study one law, one medicine subject, and which degree will you give? Or you will call it as jack of all and master of none. What is that going to be? And this is where I think multidisciplinary has to be understood in the right perspective, that you will certainly be focusing on one of the disciplines. It's not that it will be multidisciplinary. It doesn't mean you will have 100 different types of courses of different domains and you still get away with a degree. No, you have to be useful to the society. So I think if you're a science student, either physics or chemistry or something, you must do that. You must do mathematics if you're a mathematics student. If you're a history student, you will take a lot of subjects of history, psychology, but you don't restrict yourself to only that. And as rightly pointed out by a T, the T which you said, there must be sufficient width in the program, but at the same time, some depth is required. Only then you become useful to your own discipline, your own society, your own family. And therefore, this T is important. But now, in which course, how much of width should be there and how much should be the depth? That percentage may vary. This will also vary in terms of another new concept which is emerging, which is called as blended learning. We all talk about now that online classes are happening, online meetings are happening. Now, can we do everything, all engineering itself in an online mode? Probably not, because we have a lot of experiments to be performed, a lot of practical exposure which is required. You have to do hands-on work. If you have to work with the machines, unless you do all of that and only look at those pictures in the computer, I don't think you will be able to justify what you are getting as a degree. And therefore, there is a blend which is required. This blended learning also will have certain subjects which you can do in the online mode. Some experiments also can be conducted in the virtual mode, but definitely you must have a physical space where we meet each other, we will discuss, we will argue, and that is what is about the left brain, and the science is all about analytical thinking, reasoning, critical skills. All of this is very, very significant in the STEM education. So when we talk about multidisciplinary, there must be, if it is an engineering education, maybe civil, mechanical, electrical, he must have a general idea of other engineering subjects as well. I cannot be purely a mechanical engineer today. The right example given was that of autonomous vehicles or the four-wheelers which are there today. They are no more mechanical or automotive in nature. They are more of electronics and computers. And therefore, computers on wheels, which you said is absolutely right. Why four wheels? We do not know. In the future, it will be three wheels or two wheels or even one wheel. I think we do not know what is going to come out. And therefore, as knowledge is developing, as technologies are getting evolved, and therefore, all of this has to come into the curriculum is also not possible. And therefore, there is a minimum thing which one has to do. Some core courses of general discipline like sciences, and then there are disciplines of engineering or technology. There is skill-oriented or vocational-oriented courses. There are courses where there is mandatory humanities and social sciences, and there is a lot of liberal flexibility which is given where student can learn something of his own choice. While doing engineering, he may learn some couple of courses of music, and he may relate, probably physics with the music or his computer science with the music. And probably he will do some innovation which is useful for both computer science as well as for the field of music. I think that is where we talk about the multidisciplinary nature of the university. The second thing which the policy talks about is very interestingly about what is known as multiple exit and multiple entry. And this is a first time phenomenon in the national education policy. Probably nowhere in the world such a phenomenal reform has been talked about. A student entering into the system certainly is allowed multiple types of courses in the same university. That is there in most of the universities abroad. But with a program you enter in, and then after a couple of years you find that you don't want to do that, you quit that program. You carry those credits, and like in a bank, you carry the balance, you carry the credit balance of those credits in different courses that you have earned. Go to another place, either of the same domain or some other domain. Use of some of those credits may be taken into account, and then you earn a degree in another domain. So I think this is an absolute flexibility which has been brought in. And this reminds me, because your organization is Vivekananda International Foundation. Swami Vivekananda rightly had pointed out that education is nothing but manifestation of perfection already in man. So if you are talking about manifestation of perfection, how do you detect it? Sometimes it can be detected early. The new policy also talks about a change in the primary education itself. School education is changed from 10+2 system to 5+3+3+4. The first 5 years are foundational education, where a lot of literacy and numeracy and some of the skills are embedded. By the standard 6, a lot of vocational skills are imparted, minimum 2 skills by the time he graduates to 12th standard. I think that's very, very significant. Such students, when they come into the higher education, maybe science, maybe engineering, maybe in mathematics, certainly they would have got certain skill sets which are so significant to make them further useful to their own discipline. And that's why this continuity is very, very important. Another important thing is education cannot be divided into primary, secondary, higher secondary. It's a big continuum. I remember our finite element or finite difference or finite CFD classes where we discretize the continuum. The entire thing is continuum. The society is continuum. The nature is continuum. But for our convenience, we divide them into segments and study different parts. Sir, you wanted to eat elephant and you cut them into pieces. So it's a reverse one. If you want to build the elephant from pieces, that is also possible and should be able to be done actually. So I think that is what is a holistic education which we need to talk about. The flexibility which is given to us has to be utilized fully to create an infrastructure where students and faculty will engage with each other. Now comes the other important aspect of when we talk about STEM, the economy of the nation depends on the research that takes place in science and the innovations that take place in technology by which the progress of the society takes place, whether it is in terms of different business models, different companies, all of that comes from basically science and technology, whose base is mathematics. And therefore, for our science and technology, there is a huge funding which is required if we have to be competitive in the whole world. Today we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat. This is possible only when sufficient funding is provided for doing the state-of-the-art research in different domains. We have internationalization and our people go outside, their people come here. I think some of the schemes which was started by the MHRD, whether it is GAN, whether it is the ARPIT, different schemes where teacher training is involved or teachers from abroad coming here and conducting the classes or courses are concerned. All of these are very useful for not only internationalization per se, but also learning the best practices. So if you are able to fund enough in terms of the grant that is given for developing new laboratories and equipment are to be brought in. So I think there is a requirement of huge funding, and that is what again is talked about in this particular policy, which is called National Research Foundation, NRF, on the lines of National Science Foundation in the US. So this is very significant because we have found, Ashutosh ji will agree, Aggarwal ji will agree, all of us, whether it is through DST or DBT or through BRNS or DAE or various types of funding agencies, including AICT, MHRD, UGC, when a faculty member requires, suppose, 1.5 crore for doing a state-of-the-art research by buying equipment worth about 1.5 crore, and then he will be able to deliver. What happens is none of us have that funding. We will say that you restrict to 40 lakh, 30 lakh, 60 lakh, so on and so forth. And in that amount, either he will buy a substandard equipment and somehow carry on research, or he will apply to 2 or 3 different places. And if he is lucky, he will get funding from all 3 agencies and he will be able to do what he wanted to do. Or sometimes, since he has applied the project to 3 agencies and it is a sum total of the work that he is doing, and he submits the near similar report to all the 3 agencies, we suspect that this fellow has given the same report to all the 3 places, but it was the need of the entire project. The National Science Foundation kind of a thing, which is coming in with huge funding, not only for science technology, but also for humanities, social sciences, and integration with medical education, arts, liberal arts, law education. I think this is very significant in the new national education policy, which will drive STEM education along with all the other aspects. Then comes our important aspect of equity, inclusion, and online education. This is another area where a lot of debate goes on that equity and access is important. Therefore, if we have to set up universities in all the areas where there are no universities or colleges, the brick and mortar structure will be very expensive, and therefore how online education through our indigenous MOOC platform created, which is Swayam. All of this is going to become significant and important. So a lot of money is to be invested in creating the digital infrastructure to the nooks and corners of the country, whether it is in remote Nagaland village or Arunachal Pradesh or Jammu Kashmir or Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh or any place in the other part of the country as well, where hardware connectivity is important. You know that the digital connectivity needs to be established. Every home, wherever it is required, one should be able to access the education. And if it is done, then probably any person staying anywhere, it is like ATM. We can have a course from Professor Ashutosh Sharma, who is in Delhi in DST office. If he is offering a course, a person in remote corner in Tamil Nadu can take that course. I think that empowerment is also important for STEM education. And also for experimentation, there are a lot of virtual labs being developed as an extension of NPTEL. They are also significant, both in physics, chemistry, math, and engineering. All of those subjects, we have enough number of now virtual labs, which are essentially simulation based, and some of them are remote controlled labs. And if we are able to make use of all of this, the STEM policy, which is enunciated in the new education policy and also in the constitution, to create a framework where people will really be creating new inventions, new research, and someday, based on all of this, we should aspire to become a country which will create Nobel laureates in physics, chemistry, and various other subjects. I think I will conclude here because the time is getting over probably. And later there is a lot of opportunity for question and answers, whereby if there are any questions as to what is already happening, what needs to happen. I didn't tell about what AICT is doing. Based on some question which will come later, I will talk about AICT initiatives in this way. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sahasrabudhe. I think you have given us some very important inputs into how the new education policy looks at STEM. And among many things, I think you have underlined the need for new funding and also new methods of teaching, and accessibility, affordability, I think becomes extremely important. So there are going to be some implementational challenges, which I think need to be taken on board. Thank you very much for those remarks. Now, may I request Dr. Ashutosh Sharma ji to kindly make his remarks.
Namaskar to all the listeners. And I want to thank Dr. Gupta for bringing this very important subject on the table for discussion. And we already heard the very deep views of Professor Aggarwal and Professor Sahasrabudhe. You know, sometimes I think Professor Aggarwal, you should bring in more different people. You know, usually I see Professor Sahasrabudhe and myself sitting there and you. So we have often talked about the same things. And I also wish that you bring in much younger people, you know, people who are about 35 years, 30 years, 40 years, because our perspectives about things also keep changing with time and with different stages of our career. At the same time, it's also very necessary to bring people in terms of gender. Of course, we know that we need to have more women in these discussions. So since diversity, inclusion, and equity is a cornerstone of education policy, I think we should reflect that also in our panels. And I'm sure that, you know, next time you're doing it, you would remember some of it because it enriches, you know, the things that we hear and things that we talk about and the things that remain in the circulation in our minds. And there's a churning which is going on all the time. So education is the most important subject there is. And so I would not perhaps talk about the same things that we have already talked about. I would like to share some things which are related to some of the architecture, the structure, the processes of education. Now, to understand what actually education is and how it has undergone a metamorphosis over centuries, over millennia. Education has always been the foundation stone from the times of Nalanda, from the times of Greek education, and so on. The, the education that we see today is derived from the rise of industrial age. So the first, well, if you go back and say what is the industry zero, industry zero was totally controlled by the flow of muscle, the brute force, the barbarian. Industry one basically brought in the fact that we have centralized economy, we have centralized industry, which made possible by the rise of steam power or steam engine. What that means is that there was a greater control of the means of production. And that started actually some amount of fragmentation in disciplines and in knowledge. By the time we came to Industry 2.0, which is the rise of electrical power, and what that means is that there was a greater democratization of energy and its flow. So basically, electric power drives all the little machines in our homes, in our schools, everywhere. So you have control over that. So whoever controlled the flow of energy and material was the boss. And there was a response in education. And so I am, for example, a product of that response, which is chemical engineering. So chemical engineering, well, okay, unless there was petroleum, unless there was these petrochemicals and so on, the chemical engineering would have no meaning at all. Chemistry, some of the underlying chemistry would have meaning, but chemical engineering would not exist on the face of this earth. It never did. Now, as we move to the digital era, which is the rise of Industry 3.0. Industry 3.0 is basically passive digital, which means that I carry stuff like this in my pocket, and I make use of it, but it's still separate from me. So I am the boss. I control much of that digital that happens. And of course, the rise of computer science, the rise of a whole lot of these technologies have happened in front of our eyes. Today, if I tell young people that there was just not long ago, there was a time when there was no internet, there was no email, there was no cell phone, there was no data, nothing, right? They would find it very hard to believe that there was a world like that just 30 years ago, right? And in response to that, our education, of course, changed a lot. It does not change uniformly because there are still many static pockets that resist changes. And it happens a lot in some universities and so on, which is a little bit there, because the rate of change is much faster. Because this happened in 30 years. Before that, the Industrial Revolution 1 and 2 happened over centuries or many decades. So the point is, now our education, which is response to our challenges, has to be equally dynamic. So that is the first underlying principle. Unless we had that flexibility, unless we had, in fact, even understanding of the challenges that come at us at faster and faster rate, and our rate of adaptation to those changes was of equal magnitude, I'm afraid that we would have very serious problems dealing with what the future brings. Now that brings me to the point about Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 is totally about controlling data, not just controlling data, but looking at the knowledge pyramid. So knowledge pyramid is built on measurement and data right at the base. And then from there, you derive information. From there, you derive useful information. From there, you derive knowledge. And from there, you distill wisdom. So this is the entire knowledge pyramid. And from therein, you get the ability to control that knowledge. So today in Industry 4.0, it is the people who control the creation of information, the flow of information, the storage of information, the use of information, the monetization of information, building applications on information, basically is who is going to control all of it. Now, so this was clearly brought out that security today has many aspects, and much of it is rooted in the education that we impart. And this is very much the part of it. And now we also understand, look, it's not always, historically, India as a society had treated raw material with contempt. Now what we mean is we just didn't realize the value of raw material. So we said, here we make cotton, then we export it. Then somebody does something with that cotton and we buy it back at 100x, 1000x, many raw materials at 1 million x value of what we actually supply raw material. Now we make no mistakes. Data is the new raw material, and we still have that contempt for it. So there are a lot of people who are coming here. In fact, the reason I'm wearing this tie, it has nothing to do with education. It has nothing to do with STEM. I'm wearing it because I was meeting a delegation of the British Embassy, OBE kind of people, and I was asking them, how do you earn an OBE or whatever, right? So you see, a whole lot of people that come to India today, what they want is data. Now there is the rise of artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, autonomous vehicles, autonomous technology, Industry 4.0, everything, right? And the application of all of that in different domains and different sectors. So often people would come and say, look, oh, I got artificial intelligence, you got data, so you throw data at me and I would transform it and sell it back to you. Please understand that algorithms are dime a dozen, right? In fact, it's the creation of data, it's the creation of useful data, which takes much more resources and much more time and much more money, if you would, than producing an algorithm, machine learning. There's some job on this data. Now, why am I saying this all in the context of education? We are saying this because these are the building blocks of the society that we are in today. And these are the building blocks of society which is going to be there forever. The only change which is going to happen going in the future from Industry 4.0 to Industry 5.0 and beyond is the integration of biology into physical. So that's because the stuff that we are dealing with is still separate from us. But of course, this is going to get in my body and is going to get in my brain. Make no mistakes about it. It's on research, it's happening at a very fast rate. And it's going to happen, whether you like it, somebody likes it or does not like it. The technology is the master. And unless we master that technology, there is nobody in this world who has control over the flow of technology, over the creation of technology. Sometimes we think of this as a monster that we have unleashed. So now, okay, we can have that view and there can be infinite debates about it. But the fact is that we have to live with this, whatever the devas or monster forever in our lives. There are many aspects of it, and all of them translate into education. And they certainly translate into higher education aspects. So I would come very rapidly to education aspects and how the realities of today and the future must find a very strong place in there. It's not only about the rate of change of educational systems, which have always been in response to the challenges of society and technology at large. They have always been shaped by them. It's not eternal. There is nothing written on stone about what is the meaning of education and so on. Okay, so we must understand that the education is not only about its content. So while we have increasingly placed emphasis on the contents, and what I mean by that is, me as a chemical engineer, I have taught for a quarter century how to design a heat exchanger. That's because that's how it is the curriculum, because if you want to define a chemical engineer, he must know how to design a distillation column, and he know how to design a heat exchanger. But I knew all this while for the quarter century that I have taught them that this has very little meaning. Okay, so no, we may disagree with this point, but I have truly seen that the people that I have taught, they would have very little opportunity to actually make use of this content-based knowledge. And even if they have to, at some point in life, they will have to relearn it. Absolutely, absolutely. There is no doubt that based on my teaching, they would ever design a heat exchanger that would work. So what would they have to do? They would have to learn it on their own. So therefore, it comes to the point that education is not so much the content of education, but it is the process of learning, which now has to accelerate because there is a new learning which is required all the time. I can no longer be an organic chemist simply saying, look, because things were changing very slowly, so I could remain organic chemist all my life. And I would just keep on doing the same job and so on. You see, the big companies we had at one time, they go out of business in 10 years, all right? And with the best of wisdom, with the best of leadership and so on, that's because they did not keep up with the changing times and the challenges of technology. And so it is the lifelong capacity to learn and apply that learning to problem solving, which is really the hallmark of education. It's not because the content keeps on changing and not everybody needs the same content. And because when you need that content, you would have to master it again. No undergraduate course is ever going to take you to a point where you can actually run a globally competitive technology. So that's a point that I wanted to make upfront. Second is, while because of the rise of industry, the knowledge got fragmented. So which means I gave you the example of chemical engineering, but there's a cement industry, there's a leather industry, there is this, and response to that was basically fragmentation and slicing of the elephant that both of you talked about. So I would now come right back to elephant, and I would say this is the elephant in the room, right? And this is destroying a lot of things. I have no doubt about it at all. And one of the things it has destroyed wholesale and retail is the common sense. So while we become very narrow and we become very deep, the common sense has gone for a toss, totally. And this I have seen reflected in education, in exams, time and again. I give this example and people don't believe me. For 25 years, they have been teaching, all the exams have been open book. So at that point, it was a very revolutionary idea. None of my seniors actually ever supported that idea because their idea of education was you memorize a lot of things. My idea of education was that you must understand what your problem is and be able to find a solution. That happens not by analysis or going chapter to chapter or going course to course or going degree to degree, but it happens by synthesis. Other words, by putting together all that you have at your command. And nobody says you should close your book. Nobody says you should not consult Google Guru in order to arrive at a solution to a problem. And problem, as was already pointed out, is always multidimensional, which means it is multidisciplinary, which means that you would require several tools to bear on the solution of that problem. Important thing is to realize the dimensions of that problem to begin with. If we have truly understood what the problem is, 50% of the solution is already there. And the other 50 has to be found out by knowing what branches of knowledge have to combine in order to solve this problem. And it was correctly pointed out by Professor Sahasrabudhe. You see, our structure of universities does not admit of this solution. Now, our universities, and I'm discussing all of this, I'm referring actually to NEP, National Education Policy, because many of these things are indeed reflected very deeply in there. And the whole issue actually is how bold we are in order to implement all the way everything which makes sense, right? And so that, of course, is a separate issue, and we should discuss it about implementation somewhere and all the stakeholders which are part of this implementation. So now coming back to the original question about the education being problem centric, being a synthesis rather than just analysis, and so on. These are the problems. You see, after COVID-19 has disappeared from the history books, or even the margins of history books, we will have overarching problems of sustainable development. We'll have problems of rise of intelligent machines. We'll have problems related to energy security. And by the way, talking about security, Security is at every scale, from individual to global, and education is indeed the foundation based on which you find the security, a solution to security. So for me, security as an individual means to get a job, to have a career, to make sure that I'm provided for the basic necessities of life, or even for my greed, whatever it is. Now, going beyond that, there's a security of my mohalla, my colony. There's a security of my nation. There's a global security, because problems like climate change, they do not admit of national boundaries. And even going forward in the future, the integration of renewable energy, for example. So there are a whole lot of, there are centrifugal processes, there are also centripetal processes. And going forward in the future, we'll have, it will be very interesting to see which of these processes, in which context, win over other things. Other words, how much of individual do I sacrifice for the security of the society and nation? And you can ask the reverse question: how much of my identity as a nation I give up in order to have global security of the dimensions that do not admit of local solutions. So all of these are very major challenges. And what is interesting about these challenges is the speed at which they are thrown at us, and our capacity to adapt to those changes. I know I've been repeating this, but this is not something which is understood very easily. And now the second aspect of this is, in our education, as in our research, I would now for a moment not try to separate these two aspects, especially the higher education and R&D and invention and innovation. In fact, we look at where does education end and where does invention, innovation, R&D begin. This is about the time where a person enters the PhD program, or sometimes before that in master's program. So let us understand very clearly what our weaknesses there are. Because if we don't understand what the weaknesses are, we'll keep barking up the wrong tree. And we would try to find a solution somehow, which is a solution which is chasing a problem instead of other way around, right? So now, you see, PhD is not a formal education. So PhD is supposed to generate new knowledge, new ideas, and so on. But look at this person who is until yesterday was being taught on a blackboard, and he thought the meaning of education was only to crack exams. Now suddenly he's supposed to generate new knowledge. He's supposed to question everything. He's supposed to be critical. He's supposed to be irreverential, right? When he's been told that you sit at the feet of your masters to learn, now you ask him to stand on their shoulders, right? It's a total 180-degree change from what he was to what you want him to become. It is not a surprise that our PhD programs and indeed training for research is very weak. In fact, it's not only very weak, often it has, people have not understood the meaning of this at all. And I'm so sorry, I've seen so many PhD students, they cannot communicate because communication as a part of STEM was never emphasized. They cannot, so there's a lot of stress on invention, but people don't understand innovation at all. And innovation and invention have no relation to each other. And this simple fact also most people don't understand. So how do we actually bring them in line with this new reality of higher education, of research, whatever we call it, that's going to develop? So I think this is a very major weakness. I think we are going to form a committee which focuses on the quality and relevance of PhD education in STEM areas. And I think we have ignored it very, very long since the very beginning, because we just thought, look, this is the responsibility of the mentor. This is the responsibility of the advisor. But there is so much heterogeneity there. There's so much diversity there that, even the basic things about, research and being creative and being innovative and so on are not properly understood. Have I run out of time, Professor Aggarwal? You are muted.
Please go ahead, finish your.
No, I can go ahead. I mean, that's not a problem at all.
No, what I mean is
What I'm
finish your
afraid
thought.
about is that I'll go ahead forever. So,
Finish your
I
thought.
mean, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, what is it?
5 minutes. You can take another
5
5
minutes,
minutes.
perfect. So I would just skip all of that. The issue is that these things it has to be really debated and thought of very slowly and very seriously. Okay, so now, for example, we give the example that look, when we talk about problem solving in higher training of problem solving in higher education, this in Hindi, I call it by three names: the problem solving ability, and I often repeat it. And these three ways of solving a problem are called Jugaad, Dhanda, and Panga. So while there is some emphasis on Jugaad, which is not a good thing to my mind, there is emphasis on Dhanda, which means, hey, just get this, degree, go on with your life, which is very good. Okay, I think 90% people would be perfectly all right with it. The question is, are we producing 10% in our education system, which will do Panga, which means disruptive, which means take high risk, which means have the capacity to fail, which means that they are totally committed to the cause for which they have been trained. So this 10% really is the backbone of any society. We do know from a very well-known law that 20% people do 80% work in every kind of setup, in every society, in every school, in everything, right? So can we create those 20% people? That are we producing those 20% people that would be so totally passionate, not only passionate, but they understand as to what it means actually to be devoted to the knowledge and its use. So while we have even now a lot of people who are devoted to knowledge, however, we don't know how to use that knowledge in a relevant way, in a particular context, and how to transform knowledge into new opportunities. Even from the time of Raman the Great, Raman effect, which is used in every kind of electronics, but all the fruits are reaped by other industries, other societies, other nations. And we have been extremely weak in that. So this is what we need to inject in education, that education is not only for cracking exams, not only for getting your next job, but it has a meaning. And that deeper meaning, if it could be conveyed even to 10% people that are now undergoing higher education, I think that the goals, the aims of our education would be more than met. So I would conclude here by saying that indeed this NEP has been a huge stride, a huge step in the right direction. Now it is for all of us actually to sit down or to stand up, whichever is for a very large number of stakeholders to totally understand what it means, because it's not top, the top down things don't work. Okay, because it becomes a lip service, it becomes a ritual, it becomes an organized religion, and basically what it means is doing a whole lot of things without understanding and without a whole lot of outcome which is actually expected from there. So it basically means that we have to bring people on board by a deep understanding of what it means, how did it affect their lives, how did it affect the lives of their children, how did it affect the lives, the security of our nation, and so on. And through this deep understanding, that people do whatever they are supposed to do in order for us to be more effective, and whole lot of that. So these are some of the cultural aspects. Cultural aspects are in fact overridingly more important than the formal elements that get into a policy of any kind. I know this because we are in the middle of now making science, technology, innovation policy 2020, and one has to pay equal amount of attention, maybe even more, on architecture, on structure, on processes, and on culture, which is underlying all of this edifice. What are these cultural aspects? So, like, because Atmanirbhar Bharat was mentioned, Atmanirbharta was mentioned, and Atmanirbharta indeed is the bedrock of starting from education and going all the way from cradle to grave. So, I would just conclude by pointing out three cultural elements of Atmanirbharta. And this is equally important for education, is important for PhD, is important for every kind of education. to bring Atmanirbharta, it is very important that we have Atmavishwas. Now, where do we have that in our education system? The teacher is only yelling at the students. If my child gets 97% marks, I am yelling at her and comparing her with the neighbor's child. Where is the Atmavishwas? Atmavishwas is about saying, look, not only you can do it, but you will do it. And it doesn't matter what your grades are. Let's be very honest about it. We have emphasized our grades and our medals too much. But it is actually the people who are normal people who get 80%. They are the people who bring changes. I can debate and discuss this at very great length, but I don't want to hear for obvious reasons. The second aspect of Atmanirbharta is Atmasamman. Anybody who has no self-respect cannot give it to others, and he'll totally be negative person. So how do we get away from negativity, wholesale negativity? And people are saying, look, everything is wrong. This doesn't work. That happens. The top man is not working. Bottom man is not working. We are passing on our failures to other people, right? So failure has to be my own. Successes we can pass on to other people. Now, this is a cultural element, which means I have total Atmasamman and I have the confidence to take failures as my own and work on them. Whereas at the same time, any successes have to be ascribed to teamwork, which is again discouraged in education, because success in education is an individual effort. We always say it's the individual brilliance. This person got 95%, this person got 99%. Why? Because he's brilliant. But most of these brilliant people have no idea about teamwork. And for them actually to succeed and to make an impact in the real world, it is not how brilliant they are, but whether they can pull together a team that is going to be successful, right? We don't want egotistical people. What we want is Atma-Samman people. Atma-Samman, total Atma-Samman, which means we translate into Samman for other people and this thing to work together. So, and the final thing about Atma-Nirbharta is Atma-Chintan, not Atma-Chinta that occupies much of our time every day, but Atma-Chintan, which means true analysis of our weaknesses, brutal analysis of our weaknesses, and no excuses to be offered for this. So Atma-Chintan, which means I start with my own failure, not the failure of you, right? So Atma-Chintan simply means instead of blaming everybody else for my failure, I should say, what is it I did wrong today because of which there is some failure? I own that up and I plug the gap, right? Tomorrow I start working on it, right? So with these three elements of Atmanirbharta, which are cultural elements, which are not in a textbook, and in fact, our entire practices of education are anti these three Atma elements. So if we can bring that in through enlightening our teachers, enlightening our parents, enlightening our classes and people, right? We would make a society which is able to deal with every challenge, no matter what kind of challenge it is, internal, external, all of it today and in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for those remarks. And I think the Atma Chintan that you have done on education and provided us a very deep critique of our education system, and also pointed to the ways in which we can make it a success. I think that will ring with our audience today, and I'm sure there would be many questions. So we now have about 45 minutes for question and answer sessions. I'll open it up for discussion with a couple of questions of my own, and then we'll request the others to come in with questions or make brief interventions. Now, the questions that you have raised about the weaknesses of our system, who is to answer them? Who has to provide the answers? I mean, I think the people in front of me, you are the people who are have to provide the answers, and I think the answers are in the form of the new education policy, But we have last 3 webinars that we have held on the new education policy. Every time we stumble against this question of implementation, which I think both of you have also raised. So what is it that we are doing to ensure that all these good aspects of the new education policy are going to be implemented? That is my first question. The second question is, as has been pointed out by some other people, I'm just repeating that when India was not when India was the colony of the British and we were enslaved. Even during those times, we were able to produce genuine Nobel laureates. And today, after we became independent, now this more than 70 years, we still haven't produced any. Okay, we can say that our education system was bad, and you pointed out some weaknesses. But are we confident that with the given education policy, which probably will hold sway for another next 20, 30 years perhaps, we will rectify that situation? And I'm not saying, Nobel laureate just in sense of, photo ops and they are there in every television program and so on. But I'm talking of those 80% that you mentioned. The quality of that 80% who are ordinary people, but they are the ones who are doing their job sincerely. They are equipped to do their job very well. They are imbibed with these ideas that are there in the education policy, and overall, our standard of the country, whether it is economic standards or national security or science and technology, etc., improves. In other words, when will there be a general improvement? And I think this takes us to, of course, many issues. One of them was touched upon is this teachers, faculty. And I can see that there is the chat box, AICT website has some information about teacher training, etc. But the role of the teacher is absolutely critical. I mean, you can provide every kind of help, you can provide every kind of funding, you can provide everything. But if the role of the teacher is extremely important, so what are we going to do about that? I'm not even sure whether all that we are talking about, whether this is accepted by the teachers. We have seen that some of the good reforms which have been initiated by some people, some enlightened vice chancellors in the past, they have been stymied and scuppered by vested interests. So there are these questions about implementation and also taking everything into account in our country. When are we going to really match up to the educational standards that are there provided in the other countries? And I'm not talking about mostly about STEM or STEAM education. So with that, now I open it for discussion. Anybody would like to come in? Kindly identify yourself and make a brief intervention. Okay, until people sort of come up with a, since I have already started asked questions.
Arvind,
Okay.
Arvind Rangachari here.
Ambassador Rangachari, please go ahead. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this very instructive and educative presentations. The question I want to ask was, in fact, two questions. One, the numbers. We have huge numbers of students coming into the university system. Now, what happens as a result is, to give a small illustration, when I was 50 years ago a student, our class would have maybe 5, 6, 10, 12, 15 students. Today, the same classroom is seating 60 to 70 students. So there are problems in terms of space, attention that teachers can give to individual students, the absorptive capacity, the interactive possibilities, tutorial systems, the quality of imparting education. All of these come into question. all of which are connected with one, creation of additional infrastructure, and secondly, numbers of teachers so that the teacher-student ratio can be maintained, and finally, the two are connected to finances, the amount of money that can be provided. So this is one set of questions. The second is that all of this, all of what we are talking about is formal education. What happens to non-formal education? When I was very young, I was learning music. And my teacher, one of the very renowned musicians in India, he was not even fourth class pass, but his sense of mathematics and timing was amazing. And I was required to practice a minimum of 2 hours a day. I never made it very evidently. I didn't make it to any standards with 2 hours of practice. Whereas if you want to be a good musician, you might have to do 9, 10, 12 hours of riyaz on a daily basis. Now, why is there no recognition, in spite of the fact that people like Pandit Ravi Shankar, Zakir Hussain, L. Subramaniam, I could name any number of them, who have brought so much credit and also professional success to themselves, and also great glory to Indian culture, spreading it in India and abroad. Now, I don't see anywhere in the NEP reference to non-formal education and any attempt to try and accord a status to non-formal education so that it is not necessary for everybody to go and get either a higher secondary degree or a BA or MA degree in order to be termed as successful in the context of, the Indian society, Indian culture, etc., and so on. Thank you.
Right. I think that was a great question. So let me go back to Professor Sahasrabudhe. Perhaps he would like to make some remarks.
Some of the answers were already available in what Professor Ashutosh Sharma said, actually. When he talked about Atmanirbhar, he also told about Atma Vishwas, Atma Samman, Atma Shakti, Atma Chintan. These are very important. So if we are able to do all of that, I'm sure we will be embedded in realism rather than only thinking about what is wishful thinking. And finally, proof of pudding is in eating. So policy is good, but unless we implement it in right spirit, it's not going to be there. And therefore, as rightly pointed out by some of them, that teacher education, teacher training will all go on. But the spirit of teachership, that guruship, that I am going to take this head on, I think that is required to be encouraged amongst the teachers, which is attitudinal change, which is very significant, very difficult also. But unless we start doing that, and some of the best minds come to teaching profession, no change will happen. I think that is the most important, significant thing. And these teachers should be totally all-rounded. And these modules are only helpful in training them. So they are also to be entrepreneurs in some sense. They have to be artists in some sense. Because the class is like an acting, actually. They have to be on the platform where they perform. I think these are the characteristics. Last but not the least, that sensitization and sensitivity to every student is very important. Someone is very bright, he may understand it quickly, he may be given a more challenging assignment so that he is engaged on one side, and on the other side there is a poor chap who is not able to understand, and you must struggle to make him understand. I think that spirit has to be imbibed amongst the teachers. The role of teacher is going to be most significant. The ratio of faculty, student, etc., is not very important. If a teacher is passionate, he can handle 100 students also very well. And if this teacher is bad, he cannot handle 10 students. And this is proved beyond doubt even in primary schools or high schools everywhere. And today, technology enables a student, for a person who is interested in learning. See, it is like you can take the horse to the water, but you cannot make the horse to drink the water. So similarly, the students who come to the classes, if they are least interested in that, I think no one can do anything. But if they are keen and interested, even in the last bench, they will be very keen in listening to what that every word the faculty is speaking about in the classroom, or they will go to an online lecture. Many people say in the online mode, it is not effective, but I have found that online is more effective. Only those students who are interested in learning will come on board, and they do that exercise very, very carefully and with all passion. I think that driving passion amongst students and teachers, that is, everyone is a learner, great learner, lifelong learner. If you do that, I'm sure this policy which has enabled. One example was given that some universities, when they start doing some changes, there are a lot of challenges. There are such challenges. But when the policy itself was not allowing, the people were misusing that facility. Today, when policy has enabled you, so you should not now shirk the responsibility. All vice chancellors have to take this head on in their senates and academic councils and introduce all these reforms which are going to transform the whole nation. The prior knowledge which you talked about, in the NSQF framework, there is an existing facility where prior knowledge or prior art, whatever he has earned in terms of skill, is also evaluated and he can go directly into level 3, level 4, which is not there in the formal education today. Probably in the new education policy where multiple exit entry is all going to be defined, there could be prior learning from informal ways also to be evaluated in terms of some credits after some kind of examination is taken. But this examination cannot be on the basis of rote learning. Ashutosh ji rightly said that we all are used to, from KG to PG, writing exams which are based on memory. Moving away from that higher order of learning on Bloom's taxonomy, understanding, application, the analysis, synthesis, critical thinking, also innovation and creativity. Can we set up question papers on these domains? I think AICT has started giving practical sessions for faculty members to set question papers on the higher order of learning. And open book examinations are the best example, actually. You have everything at your disposal, but still you'll struggle to get, kind of solving that particular problem or solution. So I think that is where we need to move to. But for a large scale, setup that India is, in terms of nearly 3.5 crore plus students, and our gross enrollment ratio, we want to increase it to 50% in another 15 years. By that time, population also increases. We want to double the gross enrollment ratio, and population would have at least 1.5 to 2 times increased. So the number of students in the higher education sector 15 years down the line are going to be more than 10 crore. How do we 100 million? Many countries in the world joined together will not have that population. That much population will be in higher education. So certainly there are challenges, but if we use effectively technology, commitment, passion of everyone, we will succeed.
Thank you. Are there any other comments?
Yeah, I think Professor Sahasrabudhe has explained it very well. I would just touch upon two minor issues which probably have not been said in the same way. The first one is said that, look, what about the mass education? Mass education has some weaknesses, but this is the reality, and there is no other reality possible except to say that we have to train, we have to educate certain large number of people, and with the resources which would not increase overnight. Now, having said that, in fact, in a lighter way, and I may also say, while we keep emphasizing the role of teacher, and for good reasons, in this whole process of learning and education, we also have to throw some responsibility at the students. I don't know if students are listening here. In the lighter vein, I say, look, a bad teacher is really a good teacher. Why? Because he offers me the opportunity for self-learning. And so it is not about spoon feeding, because once I have graduated from the college, who is going to be teaching me? But I still have to solve problems. So what that means is that a bad teacher offers that opportunity for me actually to learn. Learning is too important to be left only either to teacher or to the student. Now we have not understood this point, that the learning is primarily responsibility of the student, because it is for his career, it is for his growth, and so on. No matter how you look at it, whether you look at it materialistically or spiritually, primarily the responsibility of education is with the student. Now we often may say, look, they are not so mature. Okay, I mean, no, they are like, I think we have to produce students who are responsible for their actions. And so therefore, it is basically a tango, a symphony between the teacher and student that determines the outcome of learning. And so therefore, to emphasize learning, self-learning from the beginning is a fantastic idea. And to somehow drum into people's mind that they're not doing any favor, okay, to teacher or to college or to education by learning. It is primarily for them. So if they want to learn, not want to learn, they want to cut classes, they want to do strike, be my guest, right? But the consequences of their actions must be very clear to them as a responsible citizen. And so this is the first aspect of the thing that we talked about, enough. But also, I may point out that in top universities like National University of Singapore and so on, it's very routine to have class sizes of 200, 300, 500 even. And as was pointed out with the current technologies, big screens here, people are listening and so on. We're creating the right kind of teaching, the right kind of learning tools. It is possible to be effective given our constraints, which are not going to change overnight. So mass education does remain a reality. We have to make it effective. Second aspect, which is to my mind is even more important in the question that was asked, which was what is the flip side of mass education, no matter how effective it is? It is basically non-recognition of spatial abilities of people, which basically means that today, if I had a mathematician Ramanujan, a poor guy will have no shot at higher education at all because he would not be able to crack any exam other than mathematics. And so, therefore, there is absolutely no way that this poor guy is going to go anywhere. He's going to rot, he's going to wither away. So now I'm just giving an extreme example. But the point is, same education for 100% people is not a sensible option, which means there are always, I was talking about 20%, I was talking about 10%, that there have to be avenues, special avenues for these people to be recognized, to be scouted, to be offered avenues for growth. I mean, why is it that somebody who is that brilliant cannot be given admission into IIT? Why must 100% of it be through some one exam which requires 3 years of coaching, or maybe more years of coaching? I don't know. Right? Fortunately, in my times there was no coaching, and so I could get into IIT, but today I could not. It's impossible unless you would do 4 years of mindless coaching. So anyway, that's a separate dimension that we would not talk about here. But point is, there are two classes of people, those who are brilliant, who are something, then there's even a smaller class, 1 in 10 lakhs, which is especially gifted people like Ramanujan. Right? They may be in music, they may be in performing arts, they may be in something, right, which is something which is very important and enriching. What is the avenue that we offer to these people? Because these are the people who would make transformations possible. It is not a balanced person who will get 80%, 90%, 100% in everything. But they have a different meaning. Okay, they will make very good, babus like me, somebody, right? Okay. So that is required. That is what we call dhanda. That's what we call stability and continuity. But people who are brilliant in a particular dimension, and what is it that we offer to them as a society? This is a very critical question. And so I want to start a scheme for scouting for what you may call gifted. Now, by gifted, I don't mean people who take exams. I don't mean people who just get 100% even in everything. It means that they have angularities. They don't fit. They are triangles in a circular peg. I mean, triangular peg in a circle. So they would never fit. But at the same time, we cannot ignore them. So how do you actually bring them into mainstream and leverage their strength? One general question to my mind about mass education, which has to be there. I already justified it. It has to be made more effective. But beyond that, as a parallel stream, do we have something which is not for everybody? Okay, and it brings, so we don't focus on people's weaknesses. We must focus on their strengths. Is there a way to focus very strongly on people's gifts, if you would, rather than their weaknesses, and to cultivate these gifts so that, you know, we talk about Nobel Prize. We talked about why there was, you know, Nobel Prize earlier. Of course, there was one, C.V. Raman. There have not been too many after that, and this is a matter of very good analysis. I have done a lot of it. And in some other session, if you care to organize a session on why we had Nobel laureates back then and then now, that's a very fertile ground for discussions and indeed suggesting solutions that might work. But anyway, uh, I think it is our collective responsibility to be able to scout people like this, whether it is teachers, school, parents, everybody. But more importantly, what is it that we can offer them in terms of growth? And I think that that we certainly need schemes which offer very concrete solution to this dilemma, to this problem. And this is the real weakness of mass education, that we cannot focus on people's strengths, especially if those strengths are unique, especially if those strengths are singular, so to say. And I totally agree with the person who asked the question. Very good question about what do we do, right? And we have, there's no doubt that we have to do it.
Thank you. Is there any other question?
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Professor M. Qasim from Jamia Millia Islamia. First of all, I would like to thank BIF for this opportunity where such experts and eminent speakers are there. We get a lot of insights into the issues faced by education in the country. My question is, if we see the education system, particularly when we talk of STEM or STEAM education in our country, and we want to push it, there is a complete diverse between the education and industry. Or let me not even use the word divorce. It is these two sectors were never married at all, as far as I can see. So these two sectors are complete strangers. So if we want to push STEM or STEAM education, whether it is even social sciences, until or unless we bring these two sectors together and they move together, it may be very, very difficult to achieve significant transformation in this area. Why I'm saying this is because we can't, Mr. Professor Anil just told us that a lot of trainings are being arranged for teachers in niche areas of technology, AI, 3D printing, VR, AR, data analytics, and so on. But it's very, very difficult to train teachers throughout the country, throughout the institutes, and even after that, create facilities at these institutions. So, if we are able to somehow focus on integration of education and industry, and with a single point focus, we bring these two sectors together, we can make significant progress in this area. One example I would like to suggest is like in BTech program, the last semester is devoted to project work. So, in many private colleges, this is my personal observation, the BTech program has become almost a 3.5 year program. The next 6 months, these students go out and they are roaming with private companies, the smaller companies. I'm not talking, of course, of elite institutions where they do some good work. So these 6 months, we could devise certain schemes where people from industry would be invited to the institute. They could run the entire semester, interact with the students. They could bring their own problems from the industry, ask these students work on these problems and solve them. And we can monitor the outcome of these projects. Right now, this project work doesn't get monitored, or it doesn't create any impact for the society. So these two things, and one a quick observation, Dr. Sharma also raised this point that when the students go for PhD, they find that the situation has changed 180-degree. What they were doing in the classroom and what they are supposed to do in the PhD, because PhD, again, you have to work on a certain problem, you have to identify a problem, you have to do application, you have to do implementation. So, since his educational background was not tuned to this, so this was my question: what can be done, particularly in engineering institutions, to bring these two domains together and fuse them together so that their synergy could be used to harness the potentialities and spread STEAM or STEM, whatever it is, in the country? Thank you.
Thank you. I think maybe Professor Aggarwal has not spoken. Would you like to make some comments?
Yeah, I can. I think the central point of discussion has become, whether it is STEAM education or STEM education or any education for that matter, teacher will remain the focus point. And unless we are able to sort of modify the attitudes of the teachers, things are really difficult to happen. I was in a webinar the other day, I think about 2 weeks ago, and in a university, and one teacher asked me an interesting question at the end of the webinar. He says, "Sir, there is a lot of good things for the students in the new education policy, but there's hardly anything for a teacher." And I said, your question answers yourself. If the students are being benefited and if teacher doesn't feel that he is a beneficiary, then I think we have very little hopes on the system. I have been saying, if the teacher has only one point agenda, that I am the well-wisher of the student, our problems are taken care of. So very fact that the teacher was admitting that the policy is very good for the students, but at the same time, he was of the view that it's not enough for the teachers. I think I took it as a very strong sentence for all of us to look into as to what do we do, because implementation is not at the hands of administrators. Implementation will be at the hands of every teacher ultimately, and unless we mentally prepare themselves and unless they are prepared to allow the student to be inquisitive. Professor Ashutosh Sharma rightly said about mass education, with which we have to live with of a population of this size. But nonetheless, if the flexibility and autonomy is really practiced, I think we can find individual solutions out of mass education also. After all, there have been examples in the world where a BSc student wrote some 12 pages, sent to 20 professors of the best universities, and one of them picked him up for PhD admission straight away. These are I myself, when I was a teacher, I think all the engineers here will recognize armature reaction is a complex phenomena and is taught for about 10 minutes in a 4-year course. When I gave a short note on armature reaction in the question paper, which required a student to write about 1 page, he wrote full 28 pages on armature reaction only. And I had no mechanism to pass it because he has not answered 3 questions or 4 questions, but he could be the greatest designer of electrical motors, was a fact which I could not take care of in mass education. But if you empower the teachers enough, like we do in many of the best universities in the world, if we empower the teachers enough, if we empower the students enough, then we can take care of such situations and come up to the solutions. I just remember when I was in the school, my Sanskrit teacher was teaching, and when he was teaching, I raised my hand. I said, "Sir, this is a mistake in the book. He says, no. He says, sir, this is how you taught us, and the book says like this, so the grammar is not matching. He says, no, book is also right, you are also right, and moves on. But within 1 minute, he comes back. His conscience pricks him. He comes back, he says, no, I cannot leave you unsatisfied. And he takes remaining 40 minutes of the class lecture to explain to me what he taught was an exception to a rule in the grammar, because Sanskrit is very heavily grammar-oriented language. And then there's a case of exception to exception, which he did not teach because it is 1 in a million times. But this particular happens to be an exception in exception, and explained 40 minutes to satisfy myself. Today, such a teacher's explanation might be taught by the school principal as to why did you waste the time in the class, you should have covered 5 pages. So somewhere I think the policy allows us autonomy, empowerment, flexibility, while implementation, there will be errors, there will be pitfalls, there will be abuses of freedom, but I think we'll have to find solutions to those, but not stop these things. Flexibility, autonomy, empowerment of the student, empowerment of the teacher. Once these are integral concepts in the policy, they will have to be implemented. Some risks will have to be taken. Just as we teach to take risks everywhere, I think we'll have to take some education risks also, believing all the time, if I give autonomy, this will happen, this will be misused. I think we'll have to forego that. Once we do that, it happens. I remember I just came across a family visiting us and a young child with them, I think fifth class. And we were just talking casually. And I said, what are you learning these days? She says, Uncle, I'm learning decimal system. But I don't understand what it is. I said, just as you have learned fractions, just as you have learned fractions, just as you have learned percentage, similarly, decimal mathematics also allows you to handle. Sharp comes a statement, says, Uncle, if the other two are able to help me out, why should I learn the third system? And honestly, I could not answer in half a second as to what is the use. So the queries of the students are interesting, and we'll have to prepare teachers to understand and answer. And I was reading, on the average, they say a 4-year child roughly asks about 73 questions per day to the parents, to the friends, to the teachers, to everybody. And that is the inquisitiveness which we have to catch. And then only, as Professor Ashutosh Sharma said, that we will be able to identify those few which can change. And I think this is again a T-shaped structure. We'll have to cover the mass education for everybody, and at the same time find some mechanism to catch the exceptions and to cater to those exceptions in the exceptional method. That seems to be the only hope. Policy enables it. How do we implement it is up to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have now about 10 minutes left. Is there any comment or a question? Otherwise, then we'll go to the panelists to wrap up the discussion. If there is a question, I can take it at this stage. Or a comment. Okay, we don't seem to have, I think, any further questions. So I just want to...
Professor Kasim was talking about Industry Institute Connect.
Yeah.
Of course, there have been many institutions where this does not exist, but people have started changing because of either CII, AICT, Industry Institute interaction surveys, or engaging in internships, which is made mandatory by AICT for all institutions, creating a portal for not only those institutions who have access to those industries in the tier 1 cities and good institutions, but also for tier 2, tier 3 cities where the colleges have no access to those industries. We are providing internships, and the number of internships are growing each year, I'm sure every student, before he completes his education, he will have an opportunity to actually work in industry. And just whiling his time in the final year, final semester here and there and getting somehow grade is not going to be possible, because evaluation is going to be done by the industry person and the faculty there. I think these changes will certainly take time to take roots and then become visible to the public at large. So I think let us hope that in the next 10 years, we will do a lot of changes which will transform the entire education system.
If I may have a very
Yes,
quick
please. Yeah.
observation on this. This issue about industry-academia interaction, it's a very old issue. It's a very vexing thing. In fact, about 30 years ago, I organized a conference on it. They call Academia Industry Interaction. The chief guest was Ratan Tata, and there was a very nice book that was produced, a volume on academia industry interaction. Sometimes when I open that book now, we are still discussing the same things which are in there. Let me just kind of give a very quick view. There are two different kind of ideas we are talking about when we talk about academia industry interaction. The first one is exemplified by the desirability of our undergraduate students or even master's students to have exposure to industrial practices and industrial culture and all of that, which is very helpful for them to actually get a job. And so this is indeed reflected in internships and summer internships, the last semester internships and so on, which plays a very valuable role. The second aspect of academia industry interaction is, you see, academia by nature is to create knowledge. It does only two things: either transmit knowledge, which is teaching, or create new knowledge, which happens, in terms of research, a PhD, a master's, a scientist, professors, and so on. So we create knowledge. Now there has to be a user for that knowledge, which one of the biggest users is industry. So it is basically a dance between a creator of knowledge and the consumer of knowledge. So this is called push and pull practices. So essentially, push of knowledge that comes from academia must kind of interlock with the pull for knowledge. So now, oftentimes we think that there is, our science is not very strong, our knowledge is not very strong, because it's not getting into industry. We are not Atmanirbhar. Our technology, most of them are imported and so on, all of which is true. The major weakness that we have, the major problem that we have is not so much in the creation of knowledge. It is in the consumption of knowledge. It is not so much in push. Of course, the push should be stronger. And I can come to the points about why it does not happen. Why is it not strong? But major weakness is in pull for the knowledge. So again, I would reiterate that sometimes if we are not understood where the weakness is, we would try to patch up places which actually do not require as much of patching up. And in fact, we know that India is number 3 in number of scientific publications in the world, despite many constraints we have had, despite, limitations on funding and so on, despite limitations on culture for research and so on, all of that, despite all of that, and given our input, if we were to calculate per rupee output in terms of publications, we are the highest. So we are number 3 in the world. So one can shrug one's shoulders and say, oh, so what, this paper, they have no meaning, whatever, right? Which is also true. But actually what is true is that this indicates the deep strength that we have in creation of knowledge. It basically means that we have the infrastructure, we have the people, we even have right thinking people, we have some deep knowledge, we can create knowledge. The problem is that knowledge does not have relevance and direction. That relevance and direction can only come from two places. Either you follow the fashion of the day, using this great university XYZ is doing this research, so I will also do this research, and because that gives me a direction. That often leads to incremental research, not profound research. We are follower rather than leaders because we are not generated our own relevance, direction, and research. The second place where this direction comes from is from the user of that knowledge, which means, for example, industry, or many cases where government is a buyer. It can come from line ministry saying, look, railways, suppose railways was to say in 5 years, I want this technology well defined, I want this kind of toilet, I want this security systems, right? And then that gives a direction, that gives relevance. Now, the problem we have is that this direction and relevance, the people who are supposed to provide it, whether it is industry, they are a little bit weak in it. So therefore, again, I'll come to this pull push. A lot of people would ask, so how does it happen around Stanford? How does it happen around MIT? Boston, the system, how science gets into industry, startup, society, how does it work there, right? How does it work there? It works there because pull is much stronger for the information, for the knowledge. I'll just tell you an example. This happens when you're in the cutting edge, when your survival actually depends on knowledge. So industry, if we were to have industry that respects knowledge, that respects that the uh, business depends on what you know and not who you know, right? So that cultural transformation is required, and this is beyond education policy. And this is something which is, of course, we work in silos. So here's the education, here's the research, here's science, technology, innovation, here is industry, here is commerce, here's all of that. So actually, this is where the connect has to come. And this connect is for industry to respect knowledge and to have pull for it. And it is not because of some altruistic feelings for knowledge. It is about saying that if I want to make more money, I want to be globally competitive, then I have to respect knowledge and pay for it, right? And so that is a very deep cultural aspect. Just as there are cultural aspects in education, there are also cultural aspects in the consumption of knowledge. And so it happens. I mean, I know this personally, so I can relate many incidents about how, for example, in many of these places, Lakshmi chases Saraswati. Now, if we also want Saraswati to chase Lakshmi, I have nothing against it, but it's a much harder process. If you know the personality of these two goddesses, then you know that this professor who is teaching, who is doing administration, who is attending conferences, who is writing papers, who is guiding students, who is also has to raise money for his research, write proposals, make use of money, create infrastructure. At the end of the day, this person is not going to have vision, energy, or any of it actually to be also chasing 10 different industries and totally convince them. So, this is a very simple solution. I've heard so many people say it, that, "Oh, it's only because, professors are not chasing industry." Our industry historically has not been ready for knowledge. So either, they have to bring out very clearly what is it that they want, right? And are they willing to pay for it, right? Instead of just importing whatever at the last moment. It is also not, it's not a fault. I'm not saying there's any fault of industry. This is the reality, and this reality is driven by many factors. Again, that we don't have, I'm not offering it as justification. So what I'm saying is that there are compelling factors because of which it does not happen. And if it does not happen, then the knowledge that you produce, no matter how good a knowledge you produce, will not, directly benefit society.
Thank you. So now I request Professor Aggarwal to wrap it up this session because we have now come to the end of the session.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gupta, for the opportunity. I think I first of all must thank Professor Sahasrabudhe and Professor Ashutosh Sharma for very elaborate presentations, very lively discussions thereafter, and a lot of interesting questions, lot of discussion. I think this is one of the best session we have had, and rightly as I expected. Friends, see, as has been brought out, it's the, I'll again finish by the sentence with which I started. STEM is a state of mind to which we'll have to go to. And I'll again quote Einstein. We said, if I am given 20 days to solve a problem, 19 days I'll think what to do, and 20th day I'll present the solution. In our setup, sometimes we give a solution on day one, and for the remaining 90 days, we keep on thinking what went wrong on the day one. Now, that's if we go that way, then we are more likely to fail. Risk taking is a game which we have to play, but there has to be intelligent risk taking. So implementation of this policy requires a lot of thought process, a lot of work behind. We should do that, but we should do that in a reasonable speed, and to keep on pushing that. By nature, I'm a hardcore optimist, and I know things will work out, and we have to learn from each other. See, I always now say that from face-to-face teaching, we were pushed to online teaching overnight. So our online teaching systems were not very perfect. We can't blame people because they were not prepared for it. Now we know from online we have to go to mixed mode. We, all of us, every day say that we have to go to blended learning. But are we working enough to prepare ourselves for blended learning in the best possible manner? My take, I'm sorry to say, is no. Now, once we know the future, why we are not working in that direction so that we have the best of blended learning. I mean, I don't know, people tell me blended learning is teach mathematics face-to-face and chemistry online. That is blended learning. Some people tell me teach physics online and physics classroom and philosophy online. That's blended learning. Well, neither of them. So let's now, once the future is known to whatever extent, future will never be known fully, to whatever extent it's known, make the best use of it. And then, as they say in mathematics, you can handle uncertainty always better when at least you can estimate the uncertainty in the information. So we have that opportunity now, and STEM education is something which has to happen, which will happen. Only wishful thinking is, if we are able to implement it well, we'll be able to do it far better, rewarding STEM education, because in this country, there has been no deficiency of original thought process. Only thing which I think quoted last time also, they say that a child of 4, if he has creativity of X, a child of 18 has a creativity X by 10, and all of us are criminals in that reduction of creativity. If we all stop doing that, I think God-gifted children will take care of and give us much better creative, scientific bent of mind solutions, because that is something which is absolutely necessary for the country. The technologies today, we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about 3D, we talk about blockchain. All these technologies are multidisciplinary. I always see that when evolution is multidisciplinary, so that means nature has told us in more clear terms that multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity is the way of life. So sooner we adopt it, better would it be, and much better will be STEM education. Thank you very much once again, the two most eminent speakers and the very enlightened audience, and Dr. Gupta and his team for organizing this webinar. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Dr.
So thank you very much, and we end this discussion. But it has given us a number of insights into the new education policy, and also what are the problems that we have still to overcome. And maybe in future we can have some more discussions around some of the questions which have been raised today. So I want to thank our eminent panelists, Professor Aggarwal, Professor Ashutosh Sharma,